Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today for the first Alumni Perspectives event of this academic year. The Alumni Perspectives series first launched last year to allow our alumni to share their experience and their achievements with the St George's community. This event has the theme Breaking Barriers, and it looks at the career paths of physiotherapy alumna Fran Brown and biomedical science alumnus Dr. Hussain Al Zubaidi. Both alumni have pursued a passion for sport alongside healthcare degrees and careers in healthcare. We'll be speaking to them both about their career paths and some of the challenges that they overcame on the road to success. So thank you both of you so much for joining me today. And Fran is a three-time European para-triathlon champion who won gold for Great Britain in the Paracycling Road World Championship in Canada in August this year. And Dr. Al Zubaidi is a lifestyle medic and long-distance triathlete with a regular slot on the Channel 4 show, Steph's Packed Lunch. So I'd like to say a huge thank you to both of our guests. And I'm going to dive straight in with the Q&A first, and then there'll be about 10 minutes at the end for everyone to ask their own questions if they have any. So I'll begin with you, Fran, if that's okay. And my first question was about your passion for sport. I know that even as a child, you took part in climbing competitions. What was it that first ignited your passion for sport when you were growing up?
So I grew up in Cornwall, so down in the southwest, and I'm a twin, and so my parents weren't particularly sporty. My dad did a lot of outdoor education, which is why I think I got into climbing. Where he encouraged us to kind of get into things like sailing and cycling and spending time outside. And my twin was really good at hockey at school. And I didn't, in the typical twin fashion, didn't want to do that mainstream thing where you both end up doing the same thing. And so I wanted to do something different. I'm far too short to play netball, 4'11". It was never going to be a good venture. So my school had a climbing club, so I got into climbing through that and basically loved the freedom of like being outside, but also training indoors for it because it meant there was some structured training. We used to do Wednesday afternoon sports, and I was allowed to kind of go and train for climbing during that Wednesday afternoon gap. So I think that ignited my passion for sport, and then the variety of sport I got from my dad insofar as sailing and surfing and canoeing and swimming, and I went to swim club and I did gymnastics. My parents were always encouraging us to do different sports and try different things. I think really gave me a grounding in the variety of things that you can do and just the benefits of being active and feeling good from being active. And I think that carried over into my adulthood definitely. And I think also the variety and grounding has given me a lot of kind of choice as to what I eventually ended up doing. So yeah, I feel like I had a really good introduction. And living in Cornwall, it was a beautiful landscape to kind of get outside and do stuff. So, yeah, definitely a privilege.
So, so you became a world champion in 2012 and 2014 again, and following your accident and the injury you sustained, what were some of the challenges that you had to overcome following your injury in order to be able to return to sport and compete again?
Yeah, so I'll briefly cover my injury just in case anyone doesn't know the background. So when I was 22, I had an industrial accident. I fell off a ladder and dislocated some vertebrae in my neck. So I became a C4 incomplete tetraplegic. So I have a spinal cord injury, basically, a C4. I can now walk with leg braces. I use crutches outside, but I originally was in a wheelchair. And so after my accident, I started off did my rehab at Stoke Mandeville Spinal Unit, so I was there for a chunk of time. Came home as predominantly as a wheelchair user. I could stand and I could walk with full-length calipers, but that was very energy efficient. And my way of adapting to the challenges that presented was to try and get back into the things I did before, basically, slightly bury my head in the sand. But also, in fairness, my friendship group were at the time, were climbers, and my support system was based around being with those people. And so those people going to the climb wall and things, I kind of still wanted to be in that environment. I know some people would find it very disheartening to go into a similar environment as before, with an injury and being unable to do what they did before, but I actually wanted the challenge of trying to get back into it. And I also saw it as a good way of an alternative to kind of going to the gym to get strong again, because obviously a significant period of time in hospital kind of have muscle weakness and muscle wasting on top of the spinal cord injury just from inactivity. So, and I've never been a particularly avid gym goer. I just, it doesn't sit with me. I find it boring. So I was like, okay, I'll try and get back into rock climbing to see if I can, this is kind of basically like my gym, especially for upper body strength, as I was predominantly using the wheelchair. I thought this is great. And I did a bit also of some wheelchair race training, so to trying to get cardiovascularly fit again. And so, yeah, it was using the challenges that I was presented with. I then turned that around into trying to get back into sport. And it was all driven by the fact that my social circle was still the same people, and they were all pretty much all climbers. So, yeah.
And so you started with climbing, that was your main passion. And I know that you first took up swimming and cycling again as cross training for climbing. And since then you've gone on to become a 3-time European paratriathlon champion. So I was wondering what it was like to move over from other competitions to paratriathlons and what helped you prepare for those.
So the cross training definitely helped, and I was using swimming and cycling for climbing because you don't get cardiovascularly fit climbing. Rock climbing, you just do not get cardiovascularly fit. So I used those as cross training, and I got really strong. But I found triathlon and decided I wanted to take part in something challenging. I think they really helped insofar as, like, climbing certainly helped insofar as it's an individual sport, so you're under pressure, you're being watched by a lot of people, you have to plan and route read and be very, make decisions on the fly, which in a triathlon you also do because things go wrong and you have to make tactical choices as you go, whose speed you swim on, whose bike do you. We're not allowed to draft in the races that I do, but where in a bike pack, if you are in a bike pack, where do you want to be, that kind of thing. And also pacing. So, like, my cross training for swimming and cycling also meant that when I went into triathlon, I knew how to pace a session. I found it challenging insofar as the paratriathlon team they're not a centralised team, but they have a central base in Loughborough, and obviously I'm not based in Loughborough and I work in London. So juggling work and training for 3 sports and having to go to Loughborough through the talent programme and then into competing was more of a challenge. When I climbing was very much something that I could do a gym session in the morning and go to the wall after work, and my working day wasn't particularly interrupted, but I was still training and then train at bigger sessions at weekends. When I got into triathlon and was actually rather than just using swimming and cycling as cross training, I was training to be fast at swimming and cycling. And then I introduced running, which is a whole other challenge with my disability. I found fatigue management and time management around work and training much more challenging. And then with having to commute up and down to Loughborough to team events, it was definitely more difficult. And on top of that, the triathlon season, there's more races in the season and they're more spread out. Whereas within climbing, we trained for a short national series at the start of the year and then world championships towards the end of the summer, and without a great deal in between. So the competition demands around work and also structuring the season was something I had to learn. And the team really helped with figuring out how that would fit, but equally not everyone on the team worked. So trying to fit it around a job was also its own challenge.
Yeah, it sounds like a huge amount to fit in, and obviously it's a huge achievement to turn a passion for sport into a career. And I was wondering if you've got any advice for students. So firstly, around how they go about doing that themselves if they were interested in taking part in sport at a competitive level, but also any advice for somebody who's trying to fit that around a really busy career or a really busy degree.
To answer both questions in one almost, have a plan that is very clear and makes sense, but also that's very flexible, because there is always that day where you think you're going to finish work at 4 p.m. and you've got something planned to train and then it doesn't happen. And then throwing that session out the window, you might have to do, but then trying to catch up and play catch up the next day or cram it in at the weekend doesn't work. Like, that just makes you more fatigued and inevitably the sessions won't work out. So have a plan, but have a flexible plan. I like to look at a broader picture plan. So rather than having a little micro, my week looks like this and I must do every session on this day. When I'm working, I have a broader plan that's kind of like, okay, in this 10 or 2 week block, I would like to get in these 4 keys. So now I'm just cycling, it's a little easier, but say these 4 key sessions. Now that in triathlon, that might have been a swim, a particular swim, a couple of really hard run sessions, and a really hard bike session. And I'm not just going to do 4 sessions, I'm going to do other swims and rides and runs for fitness alongside that. But those key sessions are almost the protected ones. So when you get the gap that it can fit in, you then do it. And that's what, so then you tick them off. I also think the main thing for somebody looking to juggle sport and a career, or even just get into elite sport in any sense, is consistency. Showing up adds a ton of value for not just your training, but also your progression. Just showing up and doing the work every day, and not, especially if you're trying to get into elite sport, is probably the most important thing. There are days where you will not want to, whatever your sport is, go for a run, get on your bike, go to the gym, go to the pool. Just doing it adds a ton. It all adds up over in tiny increments to have a massive impact on your overall performance at the end. And all those skip sessions are the things that detract from that in the long run. So I think just having a flexible plan, but being consistent within it, probably the 2 major bits of advice that I would give.
Thank you. Thanks for that advice. I'm sure that will be really useful for a lot of our students, because that's something we take pride in at St George's, that so many of our students manage to juggle competitive sport with their studies. And so just following on from that, we've had one question from the audience about physiotherapy. So in your free time, you're a locum physiotherapist and you're taking a master's in sports medicine at the moment and studying nutrition as well, I believe. And so somebody would like to know what your inspiration was for getting into physiotherapy, and also what avenues someone would need to take as a physiotherapist to get into the field of sports physiotherapy.
So my inspiration for being a physio was I didn't study until after my accident. So I was the rehab that I received, although I don't want to be a neurological physio. But it was just seeing and having all that input and seeing the progress I made physically. Just made me see that as a career path that I really enjoyed. I already had an interest in things like anatomy and physiology, so it was a natural progression. I just hadn't committed to it before my accident, so that was my reasoning for getting into physio. But like I say, I'm not a neurological physio. I work predominantly in musculoskeletal. I've done a bit of respiratory and a bit of research, but I now tend to work in musculoskeletal and sports. For getting into sports physio, it's a little bit, learn your core stuff at uni, if you can, do your NHS rotations, a band 5 and band 6. You might wonder why you're doing a band 5 rotation in respiratory when you want to be a sports physio, or you're doing ITU in neurology. It's worth it just to learn the broad scope of everything, and you learn communication skills, and you learn the hands-on skills, and you also learn how to deal with difficult situations and things that you wouldn't necessarily come across that will serve you well later. There are routes that don't include doing rotations now, so you don't have to do that if it really doesn't sit with you, if you're somebody that really hates that environment. If you're in that situation, getting into a sports role, you can start volunteering. Even when you're at uni, some places take students as volunteers in things like football academies or Saturday football teams. Have always on the lookout for physios and pitch side. So having a pitch side first aid qualification is probably the best thing you can get as a student physio to get you some almost hands-on work in that environment. Now, you're not necessarily doing physio, you are a pitch side first aider, but it's the first stepping stone to being in the elite sports medicine environment, and there'll be a physio there probably, and you can see how they work. Or if there's not, there'll probably be one attached to the team, and then you could talk to them and do some shadowing. So it's stepping stones in the door. And then you have the ACP SEM, which are basically physios in sport. So our specialist interest group, that they have a CPD pathway that once you've qualified, you can find a mentor and start working your way through CPD levels, which then gives you stepping stones into A, having a mentor, B, learning more about MSK and sports physio specifically, and then working your way kind of up within that, I say the rank, it's not really the rank, but up within getting more experience. But a good place to start as a student is definitely try and get a pitch side medicine certification. So not medicine as such, but pitch side first aid certification, and a specific one. So either the FA one, there's a sports and exercise trauma management one that movers do. There's a load out there, but something that allows you to then volunteer initially, probably, for a sports team or a school at your weekends and get your foot in the door that way, and then observe the sports medicine and how it works. That would be my advice. So you've kind of got two pathways, and you can do that even if you go the NHS rotation route. It's good to do that kind of thing at a weekend if that's where you want to go. And always, the main thing I would say is always be willing to learn and try something new. And by try something new, I mean put yourself into an environment that you're unfamiliar with, where you can learn from someone else. So find those opportunities for shadowing and for finding mentors, because a lot of sports-specific physio jobs are about who you know, and opportunities come up based on networking and having put yourself into those situations and shown your skills and been willing to learn and willing to watch and willing to put the hours in. And I think that then pays off on top of all the hands-on skills and all your anatomy and physiology and all the good knowledge that you've got through university, and then if you do the NHS regional rotation.
Thank you so much. I think that's such good advice for somebody who's just thinking about their next steps and just isn't quite sure what direction to take yet. So thank you. And I just had one more question for you before we hand over to Hussain. I was just wondering if you've got any competitions or championships you're working towards at the moment that you want to tell us about.
Sorry, can you repeat that again? I missed the middle of the question.
I was just wondering if you've got any championships or any competitions that you've got coming up that you'd like to tell us about.
Yes. So for us, the paracycling. I'm not doing triathlon anymore. I struggle with running with my disability. It's very energy sapping, because trying to run when you have no proprioception and you can't feel where your feet is, it's difficult. And I have Crohn's disease, and my Crohn's doesn't love running because of the mechanical stimulus of your gut moving around basically when you run. I find my Crohn's just doesn't tolerate a level of running, by which I mean a volume of running enough to push on my triathlon. So I feel like I've capped out where I am in triathlon. So I switched to cycling because I'm really competitive in paracycling. And so for next year, the start of qualification for the Paris 2024 games has come around very quickly with the Tokyo delay. But so I have some World Cups. So I have a World Cup in April, is my first race of the year and the first qualification race of the year. And then I'll have three World Cups, World Championships for the track and road, which are in Glasgow together next year. So we've got a home World Championships, which is really nice. And it's all of cycling together. So the able-bodied people, BMX, mountain, every type of cycling World Championship that exists is in Scotland next summer. So that's going to be really good because it's as close as we'll get to a home game. And then we have a couple of races the following year that round out the qualification window. And then with any luck, I will have qualified for Paris 2024, which is obviously August 2024. So that's my next chunk of time, is focused on that.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing all of that with us. It's really, really insightful, and best of luck with the training, Fran.
Thank you.
So I'll just ask you a few questions now, Hussain, if that's all right. So I thought I'd just start by talking about the fact that you're a triathlete alongside your role as a GP. So I believe that last year you ran 3 marathons and an Ironman event. You took part in an Ironman event, to raise funds for the Night in Hospices. And I was just wondering what some of the biggest challenges were that you faced in the run-up to a series of such physically demanding events.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was a good point last year. Quite a busy time work-wise as well. It always seems to clash, those things. But for me, the biggest challenge was, in particular for the Ironman, was getting the training in. It's relatively, well, I say easy, inverted commas, to get your running sort of fitness in, but to get good fitness on the bike, you do need to spend a fair amount of hours in comparison. And that does eat up a lot of time when you're trying to balance your work roles. So it's just about finding time and being efficient with your time when it comes to completing your work and balancing your sort of social responsibilities, home responsibilities, that kind of stuff. So that was probably the biggest challenge, just juggling up the time. But through that process, it definitely helped me be more time efficient, more focused, better at sort of saying no to certain things when it may not be the right decision. So I'd say probably the main thing that I learned from that whole process was learning how to allocate your energy, how to put it to best use.
And just following on from that, I thought I'd ask, as you're now a lifestyle GP, is that something that you've always wanted to do? Have you always been very active, or is that something that was quite a gradual process for you?
Yeah, no, definitely. I have not always been active. For quite a large chunk of my life, I've been quite overweight. So at one point, sort of in my sort of mid-20s, I was 94 kilos. And when I had a blood test done, the liver function tests were quite high. So they sent me for an ultrasound scan. And the sonographer told me that I had fatty liver disease. And that just, I wasn't someone that was unwell. I'd never gone to see my GP up until that point, since I was maybe a small child. And you kind of have this vulnerability from health perspective, and suddenly someone telling you that, okay, you've got fatty liver disease, that was a big shock. And so the first thing I did was just try to improve my nutrition and lose weight through that. And that was relatively successful, but it was experiencing park run for the first time that really changed my perspective on things. Our practice had recently become a park run practice. And so as part of that, I chose to be one of the staff members to go and help out and to volunteer at the course. And so I gave it a go running 5 kilometers. I hadn't run 5 kilometers, like, as far as I remember, any point in my life at that stage. And it was impossibly hard. I can't describe how tough finishing that park run was, but I didn't want to not finish it because all my colleagues were there and I'd invited some friends. And so I kind of felt like pressure to get to the end, but managed to get through. I was overtaken by people. One guy had a double pram, so he was pushing 2 people as well as himself, and he still got past me. I had elderly people going past me. And that sort of was the wake-up call that I needed to realize that I couldn't lead sort of the lifestyle that I was living, of sort of being sedentary, eating highly processed food, that kind of stuff. And that sort of start that journey where, I think I did that first 5K in like 30 minutes or 31 minutes, to a point now where I'm running them in 15. And so like that journey essentially of cutting it in half, was what I needed to go on the journey of education from a lifestyle perspective, understanding exactly, because in a way, like how you go about trying to be an athlete, in my mind, is kind of like the extreme version of what we should all be doing, in making sure that your nutrition's right, your sleep is right, that your recovery is right. Because in our lives, yes, we have different stresses. It may not always be like Fran, like a cycle event. It may be to someone else a long A&E shift. But these things still apply when it comes to stress, recovery, and repeat. And I've definitely used that in my own practice in lifestyle medicine.
And you've mentioned the park run, and that's a first step for a lot of people who are trying to get fit and active. Have you got any advice for somebody who is looking to improve their lifestyle and getting back to exercise maybe after a long break?
Definitely. Like the first and important step is to set a realistic goal. Okay. Like when I did that first park run, did I then, when I wanted to change my mind, did I say that I wanted to do 31 marathons, 5 Ironmans, and all the stuff that I've ended up doing now? No, like the first step was I want to try and do 5 kilometers without feeling like I'm about to die. That was the sort of first step that I wanted to achieve. And it's about breaking them down into sort of, we know about SMART goals. I'm sure lots of the students will understand what that means by doing a SMART goal. But that's vital. And often, like, patients will come to me wanting really quite big goals initially. They want to lose 2.5 stone in weight. They want to, do this. And I just go, look, that's a dream, and a dream's fantastic. But a dream is only achieved through many, many, many goals stacked up together that are realistic. And so it's good to have just small, simple steps before you then try to achieve a dream straight away.
And I thought I'd also ask how you moved into becoming a lifestyle GP for anyone who might be interested in following the same career path.
Yeah. So, like, in that process of me trying to improve my health and improve my sort of running performance, etc., I just did a lot of extra reading into nutrition, into physical activity, etc. I attended a lot of there's a lot of free courses sort of being delivered, either let's say through RCGP or BSLM, lots of great webinars to sort of build up on. And then there's lots of great training that you can access, you know. So there's the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, that's BSLM that I used before, the acronym. They do a diploma in lifestyle medicine. I'd highly recommend those that are interested in that field to do it. It's really comprehensive. It takes about a year, and a lot of it is coursework that you do, but I very much recommend completing that. But otherwise, there are shortened sort of one-day courses that a lot of the education companies like GP Update or NB Medical will offer on lifestyle. And I'd very much recommend people just gaining experience and knowledge. And for the medical students out there, there's a company called NutriTank, which is run by medical students all around nutrition and lifestyle medicine, and they offer free sessions for medical students. So it's all free to access their webinars and courses. So I very much think about maybe touching base with them and exploring that.
Thanks, Hussain. So many really good resources there. So I will make sure that I share all of these afterwards as well in our post-event communications. And related to that, I know that you've got a regular slot on the Channel 4 show, Steph's Packed Lunch, and you've spoken as a lifestyle GP on that. There might be some students on the call who are thinking about moving into that kind of role where they're able to share their knowledge as a GP in the public forum. So have you got any advice for somebody who wanted to go down that route?
Yeah, no problem. So like the TV medic is probably more common now than it's ever been. A lot of shows want to have the angle from a clinician on various news stories that come out, health-related topics. And so for those that are interested, yeah, no, it's definitely a field that you can go into. It's a tough one, if I'm being honest, to you know, be confident in getting a role, and you do have to do a lot of extra work in order to get there. The vast majority are sort of picked. So for example, I got my role through a lot of the work that I was doing for the practices in my area. I was developing fitness clubs for patients that were free, educational talks for the patients on nutrition, physical activity, and lifestyle clinics that I was running through the NHS. And so that work got me nominated for GP of the Year last year, and it was through that Channel 4 got in touch with myself. So they kind of, in a way, I'd say for the vast majority of shows, they're looking for someone that's done something a bit different or has achieved something that they feel would match up with what they're trying to do on the shows. On Steph's Packed Lunch, they're very pro lifestyle and trying to promote a healthy form of living and trying to encourage you know, the viewers to make good life choices. So I aligned well to that. So my tip would be, if this is something that you wanted to do, yes, you need to practice on delivering presentations, speeches, public speaking. Yes, you need to establish a good social media presence. Doesn't have to be incredible, but you need to have a platform where people can just have an exploration of what it is that you do, what you stand for, what you've achieved so far. LinkedIn is probably the best platform that I would create that on. And you can get a lot of really good connections through LinkedIn, through areas of interest. And then sort of finally, it's just try to find a unique selling point to yourself that you can then bring to that show. So for me, it's about lifestyle and healthy living. To you, maybe something different. So try and find something unique that makes you stand out from the crowds, so that they will consider you.
And I thought I'd move on to talk a bit about a pioneering NHS-based fitness club that you run, and it helps to educate and support patients to eat better and move more and connect with the community. What was it like to implement that, and what's been the impact on the local community?
Yeah, no, it's been fantastic fun. If I'm being honest, it's been running now in the current form for 1.5 years, and it's what it says on the tin. So we work through a primary care network. So that's a network of GP practices that work together, and we have referrals from any healthcare professional within those practices. for any condition. So like if the clinician feels like there's a benefit from having nutrition advice, physical activity advice for that condition, they refer in. And it's made up of 3 1-hour sessions, 1 session on physical activity, 1 on nutrition, and 1 on community. And I have support from dietitians, social prescribers, and health and well-being coaches to help deliver those sessions. And as part of that, we always have a physical activity section at the end, which will include some stretching, a little bit of strength, and then a walk or a run or jog, dependent on what the ability level is. But the most important bit of that is that it's about communication, not just the activity. So we call it walk, talk, walk, and run, talk, run. And there are a number of those sort of kind of fitness groups like Walk Talk Walk or Run Talk Run around the UK. So it's something that you can maybe Google, and if you just Google runtalkrun.com, you can see all the various free groups around the UK that you can connect with if you want to get involved. So like that group has been really successful. It's got great attendance each week. And we've been learning so much from it. And from that initial one that we've got based in Leamington, we're now going to be setting up 3 more around Coventry, Warwickshire, and Solihull. So we managed to get funding through Sport England and the active partnership that's there to bring it to life in 3 other locations, which I'm really looking forward to.
Sounds brilliant. Sounds like it's had a huge impact locally as well. It sounds brilliant that you're able to roll that out further afield now too.
Yeah, thank you.
And just one more question for you. I thought I'd see if you've got any competitions or any challenges coming up in 2023.
Yeah. So like 2022 hasn't finished yet. So I've got a Goodwood marathon in December. So I'm going to sort of hit that one up before. And so going into next year, the Ironman, I completed an Ironman again in October in Portugal, which is a beautiful place. If you did want to do your first Ironman, I'll definitely recommend the Cascais Ironman for you. But it didn't go to plan. Do you know what I mean? It didn't go to plan, and it was a lot of hard work. I ended up in the medical tent at the end, rather exhausted. And I feel like I've got a bit more unfinished business than that one. So I may be applying for another Ironman in sort of summer of next year. Otherwise, I'm going to explore some ultra marathons probably next year. I think there's one in Jordan, which is 180 kilometers through the desert there, and that I'm tempted. It keeps coming up on my social media because I've obviously searched it, and so the algorithm's telling me that I have to do it at some point. So I may take the jump on that one.
Well, best of luck with the training. I hope it all goes really well.
Thank you.
So thank you to you and Fran. That was such an interesting session, and I would like to open it up to our audience now, just to see if anyone else has any questions. So if you would like to ask a question to Fran or to Hussain, please put your hand up now or drop it in the chat. I'll keep an eye out for questions in the chat as well. Just give everyone a minute. I've just opened up a Q&A as well. So if anyone did want to drop a question in there rather than raising their hand, please feel free. While we're waiting, I thought I would just invite our Vice Chancellor, Professor Jenny Hyam, if she's here, to say a few words. Hi, Jenny.
Hi. Yeah, well, what a great session. Thank you so much, both of you. Really will be inspiring for the students who will listen to it subsequently. But I think it has been for everybody on this call. And Fran, I completely agree with you. Just showing up is a really important thing, whether it's for elite sport, whether as a mate, whether as a fellow professional co-worker. The one thing that I think really gets on people's nerves is flakiness. And I think that we underestimate the value of not being a flake, of just turning up. So all of what you said was inspiring, but I really took that home. And Hussain, from you as well, brilliant. And lovely that you, as a picture of somebody at Premium Health, have shared the fact that it wasn't always that way. And I think that it's really intimidating often to have perfection or elite, you know, ability. But you've said also it's been your journey. So both of you, really proud to count you amongst our alumni, and also very grateful for you coming today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was so inspiring, I think, and I keep talking about this myself, but as the alumni engagement manager, one of the favorite things about my role is that I get to speak to alumni from so many different backgrounds, and it just shows we speak to so many who haven't followed that traditional career path, but I think it opens students' eyes up to what is out there for them as well. So it's been so interesting to hear from you both. I thought I would just see if there's anyone here from biomedical science or from physiotherapy who'd like to say a few words. So we have Professor John Hammond here. I know that you missed a bit of the first Q&A, but did you want to ask anything now or say a few words?
I will say some words. It's just delightful to see you, Fran. And I'm sorry I missed you because I was presenting another event at this time, but really inspiring to see what you've been up to, and I'll have to do some catch up on listening to this afterwards.
Thank you, John. Have we got any other questions from the audience? I'll give everyone a minute. But if we don't get any through in the chat, then I can always ask people to submit questions afterwards. I can pass on to you both if that's okay with you, Fran and Hussain.
Of course.
I know that we've got a few who catch up afterwards who might have questions to ask. So, and while we're waiting as well, I thought I'd also mention, so there's been a lot of conversation about competing in sport or taking on challenges outside of university around your studies. So applications are actually open at the moment for our Alistair Hunter Fund. So that allows students that helps students cover the cost of competing, because we know that costs are quite high, and we want to make sure that that's not a barrier to students taking part. So if that's something you're interested in, you can drop me a message. I'll leave my email address in the chat there. And I'll also send a link to the Alistair Hunter Fund details in the post-event communications to any students who've joined this call today. So I'll give everyone another minute in case anyone's got any questions. Otherwise, I think we'll leave it there. And we have got, sorry, we've got a question from John Hammond.
Bring myself back on. Can't help myself asking questions, but it's for both of you, Hussain and Fran. I was hearing your discussions about the multidisciplinary team, I guess, Hussain, and really, what are your tips for us in terms of how you really engage in a multidisciplinary way, and not just you, but Fran too, in your practice? What are the sort of things that help in a multidisciplinary team?
Yeah, but is it okay if I start, Fran?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So if I look at the lifestyle clinic and what's made it a success, it has been utilizing the different skills from the different, what we call them ARRS staff. So for those not in primary care, that stands for sort of additional roles reimbursement scheme, which is sort of a new scheme that's to bring in lots of other professions into primary care. And yeah, they're extremely helpful. They just have different perspectives, and that's what you get when you have different training, different experiences, and working in different sectors. That, for example, the social prescriber can bring to the community session of the lifestyle clinic that someone like myself or the dietitian just will never be able to do. And it's about knowing where we need to work independently and also where we can work really well together. I think sometimes you can stifle other professions if it's constant collaborative working. Sometimes you need to know when, okay, that is something that we need to let them take a lead on, and in a way just take your hands off the reins to let them guide the direction. Because even though I lead the clinic, when it comes, for example, to the community section and that direction, I'm very much having to let them guide it. And it's about having the confidence in your colleagues and also giving them that space, because then they're going to do better if they feel like they have that autonomy and that responsibility.
From my perspective, working in an MDT, but also it's strange because as a physio I work in an MDT, but as an athlete I'm the centre of an MDT almost. I'm the focus of a load of input from different professions. And both give me slightly different takes, but ultimately all of them come down to communication and being willing to be open and communicate, not just positive, but also negative. So feedback and take feedback and give feedback and be honest and collaborative. And a bit like Hussain said, not being unwilling to be like, this isn't my scope, or this isn't my wheelhouse. I might know a bit about this, but it's not what I'm best at. Actually, I'll refer you to my colleague here, or in my case, it'll be like, there's no point me asking the physiologist what I should eat for breakfast. And the physiologist should be in the right place to be like, no, don't ask me what you should eat for breakfast, go and ask the nutritionist. Working together and finding what is that central common goal, and it might be your patient, or in my case, it might be me as an athlete. And having that communication, but being prepared and willing and humble and honest enough to kind of feedback and pass someone on if it's not your wheelhouse. And equally being prepared to accept additional workload if it is your wheelhouse, but you might not see them as your primary patient. Maybe you're not their primary contact, but if somebody's saying, actually, your specialist knowledge in this would be really helpful, being prepared to step out of your kind of time zone, like your structured time, and being like, you know what, yeah, I can give to that, is really important as part of that collaboration. And I think, yeah, being humble enough to know when someone else has more experience or someone else has more knowledge, but also being willing to learn and work with them is really important. And ultimately, it all comes down to communicating well between taking feedback and giving feedback, be that positive and negative.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, of course.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Reflecting back on your time at St George's, do you think St George's helped you to be part of the MDT, or is there any advice you'd give us as academics planning curriculum on what we should be training to do to help work as part of the MDT?
Should I start on this one? From my perspective, I think placements are really helpful because it throws you into that environment. And as a physio, you get put on placement, and it literally throws you into that MDT environment, because it also throws you into an unfamiliar environment, which makes you work with other people regardless of whether they're a different speciality or not. It also should make you humble, because you're going in as a student to learn. You're not anywhere up that tree. You are the bottom of the barrel, and you need to fit in. So it makes you really good at learning how to accept and take feedback and integrate yourself into a new environment. But I think, from my perspective, if there's anything that could be done better, potentially a little bit more collaboration. So when I was there, I know there's obviously the medics, but there's the paramedic scientists, there's the radiographers, there's all of that broad scope studying in the same uni. And I know we did anatomy and physiology in the first year with everybody, but then beyond that, we didn't really do anything with those people, and maybe a little more collaboration. Now, there's never a time to do a project or something. It is very time pressed, but at the same time, just some sessions where you have to work with other professions, even if it's just by actually just learning, going to something they're doing and learning about what they're learning, and then them learning about what we're learning. Because actually, how many therapeutic radiographers actually really know the scope of physio practice? And like, as a physio, I don't know the scope of a therapeutic radiographer's practice, for instance, or I didn't back then until I ended up in the professional world. Maybe just having a little bit more of an interplay between those career pathways and learning about each other would be a really good way of starting that communication. That would be my thought.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I definitely feel working and studying so closely alongside so many different professions within healthcare in one university was very helpful. I've still got friends that from the various different courses, and that's great. And I sometimes, I always worry when you know, if you haven't had that understanding of the training that the other profession has gone through and has undertaken, you may not fully appreciate their worth. But you know, knowing the physios that were working there and the various other professions, it just makes you realize, okay, you know, like they really are trained up to a high standard, and it just gives you that respect for that area that they're working in. And I think the key thing that well, any good leader or any good manager needs to understand the value of the employees, because that's where all the asset is. It's all there. It doesn't come from yourself. It comes from how you engage them to bring the best out of themselves.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Hussain and Fran, for that really insightful information there. Has anyone else got any questions before we close the session? I think we'll probably have a few questions afterwards by email, because we'll have a few students catching up on this. So I will encourage them to drop me an email in the alumni inbox, and I can pass anything on to you both. They want to know a bit more about both of your career paths. But thank you so much again. Honestly, really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak to us in your lunch hour today. And I'm sure everyone's found it so useful and gained some really interesting insight into two completely different careers. So thanks again. And I hope everyone's enjoyed this session. And I look forward to letting you know about the next one. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And thanks very much again.
You.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.